All right. Hello, everybody. It is good to be back. It's been a little bit of time since we were last on. It's been a busy few weeks with Laracon online, and what a great Laracon it was. And I'm sure you all enjoyed it as much as I did. So many new things and so many exciting topics to take away from. And just other things, Pest Parallel, the Pest Meetup. There's been so much that's happened since we last did Pest in Practice. So it's great to be back. Hopefully my audio is working well. Just drop in the chat if there are problems. I do have, it is warm today, to say the least. So I do have the fan running in the background. So sorry if there's a little bit of background noise, but I'd rather have a little bit of background noise than you see me pouring with sweat the entire stream. So I think Tom is with us. Tom has rushed back from work to try and make it to the stream. So I'm going to bring him on and we'll see if he's around. 1 second. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Luke. Yeah, sorry, today without camera because I was really on a rush. I landed right 1 minute before, so I'm still sweating. Just changed my shirt and...
No worries, man. Thank you so much for joining. It's great to have you back.
Yeah, also happy to see how we can add the new feature to Pest. Because I also have a package that will really benefit of it. This test suite has, nearly all tests have a repeat 100 or 1,000 times. So,
so this is actually your baby, right? I think you were the one that suggested this feature from the get-go.
Yeah, but I think I'm not the only one. I've seen it on Twitter. Said also. Some others think that it's a cool feature because I don't know who it was. It was 2 days ago. I think someone said, oh, he didn't know it at all about repeat functionality on PHP unit, for example.
Yeah,
and
I saw that.
Having it on a per test basis is just really cool because I think, I don't know if really all of us know it, but at least some developers around for several years will all had the situation of any test failing once every 100 or 1,000 times, and no one knows why, and you just think, okay, don't care, repeat the CI and everything will be fine.
Yeah. Run the GitHub Actions again; it will go away. Yeah. That is not the solution.
It is one, okay, but not the preferred one.
No, definitely not. So in case you're still wondering like what we're talking about, I'm going to, this is the Pest repo that we have here. And I'm going to build a test case that we will be working with for the remainder of the stream. And in that test case, we'll actually build the feature that we want now. So if you didn't know, Pest is tested with Pest, which is quite meta and cool. But basically, if we look in the test folder for Pest, inside this features directory, you'll see all of the features that Pest has to offer. So you can see here we have our different hooks that are available. We have tests for coverage. And so what we're going to do is come in here and we'll create a new test file. And I'm just going to call this one repeat. So this is going to be, I don't really like that PHP Storm does that for me. This is going to be our test case for the remainder of the session. One thing you'll note if you want to contribute to Pest, by the way, is that the tests themselves are quite free and loose. As long as you're testing the feature, that's good. So if you're not like used to thorough testing, just add what you can, and then the community will no doubt help out. Don't let that stop you from trying to contribute. So let's create a test. Something like it can be repeated a set number of times. That's the basics, right? Screen share is a little blurry. Let me see if I can. I hope this doesn't break everything. Let me see if I can reduce my resolution just a slight bit more, just make things a little bit bigger maybe.
Yeah.
Might be a bit better. So before we actually put anything... Oh, sorry.
One thing you could try is if you go to Restream and to the settings icon, you could try to reduce your video resolution. Because I think the video resolution isn't for the whole stream, but okay, it's already standard, okay. Possibly that's also the issue. I don't know if it applies to the whole stream or no. YouTube says quality is 720, okay.
Does anything. Don't know whether that will do anything.
But now it's, for me, it's crisp now, so everything fine.
Happy days. You know, over the course of 5 streams, we're almost at the point where it's like a working stream. I'm almost impressed with myself. Okay, thanks for bearing with us, guys. And thanks, Edgar, for pointing that out. So I'm going to just leave this for a moment, the actual body of the test, and I'm going to tag on the functionality that we're actually interested in. And basically, what we came up with was a repeat function that you tag on to the end of the test, and you just provide the number of times you want this repeated. So let's say 10 times. If we tag on 10, I would expect this test to take place 10 times. That makes sense? Would you say that that's a fair syntax, Tom? Okay, we have lost Tom. Or maybe I've lost Tom. I'm going to say...
Sorry,
say,
you haven't lost me. Yeah, so repeat... the signature is totally fine, yeah. Absolutely what I expected it.
Happy days. So one of the tricky things about writing tests for Pest is you're obviously testing the test framework itself, which makes it quite difficult in certain situations. How do you actually test that this is going to be repeated 10 times? Now, I've already kind of thought about all this ahead of time. And the way I'm going to do it is using the globals. So I'm going to set a PHP global, and we'll call this an iteration count.
One question, do you really need a global? Wouldn't it be enough if you just define a $RA outside of the it function?
Possibly. So this might work as well. You're saying like the file gets loaded and this will only get loaded once. So possibly. I think what I based the global on was before all. Although this looks like it's been refactored anyhow. Yeah, okay. Let's go with that then. So just an iteration count. And we've got the function. We basically are going to want to increase the iteration count inside this function based on the current repetition. So we'll come back to that in a moment. But then what we're going to do is use after all. So after all is a hook that Pest offers that allows us to basically wait until all the tests have finished running inside this test case. And we can just say, well, I would expect, so can I use use here? Yeah, I can. I would expect the iteration count to be 10, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we're repeating 10 times. In here, once we have our logic, we will be locating, so it'll be something like this, iteration, it might even be something like this, iteration. I'll explain why this syntax is here in a moment. But it'll be something like, and I'll need to use iteration count and say iteration count equals. Although, will that update the file-wide iteration count?
Shouldn't you do just iteration count plus plus?
Yeah, I could do that. Well, the only problem with plus plus is it's not guaranteed then that I'm technically working in the repeat. I guess it is, because the only way it would get there is if it had happened 10 times. Yeah, you're right. But that's not going to copy, is it? If I pass this, then we are definitely dealing with the file wide file-wide variable. Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of a bit of a meta test, and you won't have to do this in most Pest applications, but when testing Pest itself and new features, we often have to come up with sly ways of checking that things actually worked as expected. So hopefully that's making sense. Now, something that you might not know is that pretty much all of Pest's output isn't actually contained in the Pest repository. It's actually contained in the collision repository. So Nuno has a package called collision. Collision gives you beautiful reporting in the console, and it has adapters for the whoops error handler, which is what Laravel uses, and it has an adapter for PHP unit, which is what Pest is built on. So I'm actually going to show you a pull request that is currently outstanding in collision, which forms the basis for all of the work we're going to do in Pest today. Okay, so bear with us because we're working across two different repositories here, but I didn't want to be jumping between repositories during the stream. That's a recipe for disaster. So I've already created the pull request for repeat support in collision, and then we're gonna add the I guess the complementing part in Pest. So let's take a look through the files that have changed in collision itself. We can skip this one. This is just an update to the PHP unit file. The first thing is we have this new iteration class. And this is just basically a fancy tuple where we store the current iteration and the total number of requested iterations. So I hope that makes sense. And what we can do is we can say, look, is this iteration valid? So we're able to check and say, are you actually an iteration that should run? And I've added this for backwards compatibility more than anything else. And also if you're in PHP unit, which won't support repeat, we don't want to break any PHP unit tests because of this iteration logic. So looking down at the next file, here's the PHP unit state in collision. Now this is responsible for building the output that you're used to seeing in Pest and in the collision handler. So you can see here all of this output, so where we get pass and the details and the little thing at the bottom here with our information, that is this file here. And so you can see here we have, does this test already exist in the test case? So this is going to make sure that you haven't got duplicate tests. So this is one of the things that was not, I suppose, a technical challenge with this pull request is the two tests have the exact same name because it's a repeat of an existing test. So we needed to update collision to inform collision that it is not the same test, that it's a different test, and that will allow collision to run it rather than skipping it. So you can see we've updated the logic from basically, well, if they've got the same description, then they are the same test, to actually saying, well, if they've not got the same description, then continue because it's not the same test. Or if the iteration is different, we'll return false. But if the iteration is the same, so basically if the iteration has the same value and the same count, so the same total and the same current iteration, then we'll return true. It's the same test at that point. And we do a few little backwards compatibility checks in the iteration matches method. So for one, we're saying make sure that the comparison isn't null. In other words, make sure the iteration that's been passed through isn't null. Make sure that the test is an instance of this interface, which we'll take a look at in just a second. And then basically, as we said earlier, make sure that the iterations aren't the same. Okay, so heading further down, here is the style. So style is responsible for all of the formatting of the PHP unit output. So you can see here, I've just changed a few things around, and the third thing that we pass into this test line from, which generates the test information that's going to be output in the console, is now this iteration that comes from the test result. So So the test result is basically the test class, the PHP unit test class, or Pest test class in our case. And then we write write a warning. So in this case, we're passing an empty iteration because warnings don't need iterations. And further down, we have the iteration. You can see if we have an iteration, we're going to build a description. So that description is basically this foreground blue options bold, which is Symfony console syntax. And then we have this cool little repeat symbol that we've included. And then iteration number of iteration total, which is this here. So it's quite simple under the hood of what's actually going on and how it's working, how it decides whether or not to output that. The only other thing is this here. This is the test result. So this is, again, how Collision is able to understand what PHP unit is actually doing. You can see we can pass an iteration to the end of that as well. And that's basically going to either use the repeat or discard the repeat, depending on whether it's needed or not. Okay, the most important thing is actually this interface for us this evening. So this interface is a way of us being able to say, here I want to interact with Collision, but I am not Collision myself. And I'll actually show you how Collision already does this, because Collision does this elsewhere. And we're going to base our local copy of has iterations on the same logic that Pest already uses. And then we just have a test that makes sure it actually works. Okay, so that's the Collision PR. It's not in yet. And if you don't know how to get around things not being in or merged, I will show you that right now. So in order to make sure we're playing with the latest code, we can actually come into the composer.json file of the test repository. And I'm going to add a new repository. So at the bottom, you can just use this repositories array. And each item is an object. The type is going to be path, so a path to a local project. And the URL is going to be, well, I'm reaching back out of this installation, and in the same parent directory, I have Collision. So I've already got Collision downloaded. And Collision actually is already on the correct branch locally. So I just need to come back up to Collision, which will be somewhere around here. Here we go. And I need to include dev repeat support as an available option. I hope this is making sense so far. Hey to Dan, cool that you're with us. And now I can go to the terminal, and we can, let's find it here. I already used it earlier. Let's just type it. So we can say composer update Uno Maduro Collision. And it's already installed because I installed it earlier. But basically, that's how we can symlink to a local instance of a package. And that allows us to be using the code that Collision provides without actually needing to be on Collision. Okay, I hope everyone is still on board with where we are so far.
I am.
That is good. Then again, you are like next level. You're like the dictionary of PHP. Like there's nothing that you are not on board with or don't know. So I'm not going to take that as full indication, but thank you.
I wouldn't second it that I said there's nothing, but I have a lot of ideas what's possible with PHP and how you could achieve it. So yeah. It's nice. But I don't know everything in PHP.NET, so there's definitely a lot of times per day when I check PHP.NET. Or I'm pretty happy that PHP Storm is my second mind, so I always mix the order of arguments for array map, for example, where I'm pretty happy that collections in Laravel have just a map function, and I just put in a closure. So yes. Laravel cares in which order it is.
That's what PHP.NET exists for. But anything that's not PHP.NET, I'll come to you. Okay, so I think we need to start with our interface. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So we're in the pest repository, not collision. We're in the pest repository. And note this file here has printable test case name. This is really interesting. Let me just close the sidebar. Because what you'll notice is that collision actually has a class named the same thing. And what Nuno is doing here is basically making sure that if collision doesn't have this, so if you're on an older version of collision, things are still going to work because we still have our local interface. So we can define that we should use our local interface rather than relying on another package's interface, which I think is quite a nice way of doing things. I wouldn't see much need for it in like an end user application, but certainly at the package level, it does make sense. So what I'm going to do is literally copy and paste this. And did we call it has iterations? Has iterations. Let me go check that. Yeah, has iterations. Let's just find the actual file. Here we go. So I'm going to grab this namespace here. And we can say, well, if the interface exists, has iterations, then we want has iterations, which extends this interface. Okay. Again, I hope that's making sense as to why that's there. But if the interface doesn't exist, then we'll just roll our own version of has iterations. Okay. Now, if you have a look at what has iterations has in it, it just has a single function called getIteration that returns this iteration class. The iteration class is collision's iteration class. What I'm interested in is has printable test case name does have one function in it. Okay, it's interesting. So with this in place, we can now refer to our local instance of has iterations rather than having to rely on any other instance in collision. And if it happens that collision doesn't have this, then we'll just fall back on our interface that doesn't extend. Hello, Frake. Hello, Samuel. Great to have you with us. So anyone who's just joined, we're currently partway through. I don't want to say any percentage of the way through because I have no idea. Implementing repeat support in Pest. So repeat support will enable us to easily rerun a test any number of times that we define. And that can be a single test or multiple tests. You can just tag it onto the end of a test with a single method. Okay, so where do we put this interface? Here is the cool thing about Pest. Pest is dynamically built up. And you might think, well, Pest has nothing to do with classes, but Pest has a lot to do with classes because once the magic has taken place, every test, not just every test case, but every test in your Pest test suite will be converted into a class, which is something that took me a while to wrap my head around. Nuno did a great job of explaining that on the dive he did with Frake. But yeah, every test has its own class once it's been built.
For everyone interested, yes, the whole Pest suite depends on eval.
Yes, it is true. And that's a good thing. We wouldn't have Pest without eval. Just use with care. So in concerns, we have a testable trait. Now, this testable trait actually gets magically appended and used in every one of those dynamic test classes that I was just talking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So basically, because this gets appended, we can put the answer to the interface here, so get iteration, in this testable file. Now, what I'm tempted to do, because we've got this has iterations that tries to use collision, but then falls back on our own version, I'm tempted to do the same thing with our iteration class. You see any problems with that?
I don't think so. So with the iteration object containing the index and total count, or?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, our local version would literally be if I can find the iteration object here. Here we go. It would literally be a copy of this, but by default, it could just extend the iteration that comes with collision. But if this didn't exist for some reason, we'd be able to fall back on our own local version, which would just stop any backwards compatibility issues with collision, I think. I may try without first of all, and then get some feedback in the PR. Possibly. It seems a lot of work to do, and the answer just be, well, just update collision. But we'll see what people say, I guess, once the PR goes in.
One thing I wonder is the has iterations interface in collision.
Yeah.
Has iterations has methods defined, or?
It just says there's one method defined, yeah.
Yeah. So in which way does it help to have our own has iterations interface if collision isn't there, if we can't use it the same way?
Yeah, so that's what this is, I think. I've not put the method in because nothing in our code will actually call upon the get iteration function, if that makes sense. So we don't actually have anything that calls this. The only thing that calls this is already inside that pull request in collision itself.
Oh yeah, because we don't need the iteration instance on our end, but just define it and increment it.
Yeah,
but don't we also need the iteration instance to increment the counter in the pest code base, or how does it work?
Well, this is the that's a good question. So the way I was planning on doing it was actually just with two variables that get built into an iteration. So pest deals with each one as a separate variable, and then by the time it gets to collision, it's been put into an iteration. But let's see how that looks kind of as we go forward. So I'm about to go quite deep here because we're going to go into the test case factory, and this is where you're going to see. Where is it? Here we are. Look at this. So the thing I'm actually interested in is this here, this traits code. Because what we need to do basically is inform this class, which is our test class, that we want to use this has iterations trait. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So here we already have this has printable test case class FQN, which I am going to duplicate the line and replace this with has iteration class FQN. Just check the chat.
The interface is named, or the interface is named has iteration, so plural.
Yeah, you're right. Has iterations, and so now we can use this local version instead, right? So we bring in the local pest version of it, and what we want to do is basically we just need to append it, right? So where we have implements has printable test case class function, we can also say has iterations class function.
Yeah.
So now every class will actually implement both interfaces, and every class, again, let me try and clear this up. Every class is every single test in a Pest database, in a Pest test suite. Sorry. So get your head out of PHP unit, because that's not how we're interacting with this. So every single test in your test suite is its own class, unless you've got some PHP unit tests in there, in which case they'll be handled by PHP unit, not by Pest. This traits code here actually returns, and I don't know whether there's reference to it here or whether it's referred to further up, but it basically has this testable class inside it. So in order to make collision happy, what we can do, we can put this inside of here. And this is what I was saying earlier about whether or not we have our own local iteration class, which I think we need to kind of build the functionality out and then come back and decide on that. So we have our we have get iteration. We need to obviously build the iteration up. So the easiest way to do that, return new iteration. Okay. And what iteration expects is the current iteration and then the total number of iterations. Both of those are integers. So we need to store that information somewhere. So we have the constructor here. So the testable constructor, this is what gets built up dynamically by Pest. I guess we could like literally include an iteration. So let's make it nullable. A nullable iteration, or just thinking about this, we have this isValid method, which would take care of everything for us. So we might even be able to just say, like, you have to pass an iteration.
One thing, because we now get to what I've already wrote as a review on your pull request. Yes, I live reviewed it.
That's next level.
I don't know if it's really good to have the iteration object maintain its own optionality in the whole context, because if I have an iteration instance, it should be an iteration. And then if the test case isn't iterable, so it doesn't have defined the repeat method, I think it should just don't return an iteration instance.
So you think we should always be able to return null or an iteration?
Yeah, because the iteration object is, I've already also wrote it in the review. I've compared it to the sequence object in Laravel factories.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have an iteration, and it should be, if you have an iteration object, it should also be an iteration.
Yeah, that makes sense. I actually agree with that. Yeah, it requires a little bit of jiggery pokery. So if you're wondering about the double underscores, basically this testable is going to become part. So when you're in your Pest tests, you write this here. It's probably going to bite me in the bum later on when I forget that I've written this. But you know, when you access like this, and then you've got access to the test case, anything in here will also be available here as well. So you could actually search for this underscore test inside a Pest test, and that is actually this object here. Obviously, you shouldn't be going around there, so that's why Nuno decided to use double underscore. It's basically a hidden property that you don't need to concern yourself with. So I want to grab double underscore, and then let's call it iteration. And we want to say that this is a iteration, or it could be null. The iteration object, if this test has iterations. Go with that for now. So then in our constructor, we can say this underscore underscore iteration equals iteration. And then we can come back down to our get iteration method, and we can just return this underscore underscore iteration. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Oh, hello, Tom.
Hello.
You have face.
Yeah, Marian complained about hearing me but not seeing me, so
that's nice.
I hope that he's happy now.
You were deeply missed by him, obviously. Okay.
I haven't fully followed, but if the iteration is optional, shouldn't the method allow to return iteration or null?
Yes, it needs to. So we need to update collision as well to optionally pass an iteration. I think the
you can also refresh the page so you can see my comments. Yeah, right. Click on merge.
Yeah.
So two things I have there, so type changes and also naming. I don't know which style guides or code guidelines Pest follows, if they prefer these fully explicit property namings like total iterations, or if they normally follow the shorter Laravel way like count, total, index.
Yeah. Tell you what, we are symlinked now, so we could actually go and play with this in the collision. In the collision repository itself. So we're saying that we can return a nullable iteration and PHP Storm. I'm really impressed by it. I've got a M1 Mac Mini recently, and I'm just like super impressed with the fact that it actually runs and doesn't die when I'm streaming.
Have you got your M1 Mac Mini?
Yes, this is what the stream is running on. It's so much better. I can't even believe how much better it is.
It's like a spaceship compared to, I don't know, a paper plane.
Yeah, exactly. It is exactly that.
And I also don't know if we need these default values at all.
Did you just call that total? I think you did, didn't you?
Yeah.
We wouldn't need that anymore, but that would just mean I need to change. So I'm going to leave that there until I just remove it in a second. Okay, let's find where I used that. And here we go. So now we're just going to say equals iteration is not equal to null. And that actually then will become index total. And this is going to complain because it's going to say, well, iteration will always be okay, but it actually won't always be okay. I need to find usages of test line from, which is only going to be local because.
One thing regarding the index naming. Index is normally in PHP context 0 based. but I think that we are 1 based. So the first test run will be 1 of 10, 2 of 10, and so on, and not 0, or?
Yes.
So how about renaming again the index back to iteration, what you had before? Because index normally is really 0 based. Yeah.
Like that. Let's make sure that we have this test result is part of collision, and we need to make sure that this iteration, the iteration can be null, so that's fine.
Have you thought about line breaking the arguments?
These arguments.
Yeah.
That's not for me to say yes or no to. Do what I'm told. There we go. So the iteration's already set because we were checking it and setting a default value if it didn't exist.
But you have to change the type, and the variable declaration.
Yes. It can be. I'm going to use one of those. So it can be null. That can be null, which is good. Gets passed. That's fine. And then so we check if the iteration's there, and we're going to return the new self, which is, I think that's all of the interactions with it in collision. I think we do in the tests have example with iteration test. So this has literally like one test in it because PHP unit just doesn't fit with the format of iterations. It's perfect for Pest, but it just doesn't work with PHP unit well. So we just do this once. But what we can do is we can test that the output is correct. So I'm going to come into here. Let's go cd into collision, and let's run composer test unit. There we go. And I'll just run a full composer test on that as well. So if you're wondering, pretty much all of Nuno's work uses the same composer script. So there's composer test, which tests style, tests types, it tests your unit tests. Composer lint allows you to fix the style problems automatically. That's using PHP CS Fixer. So that's a good one to remember instead of manually going and changing things. And here we go. So now PHP Stan is throwing an error. So this is kind of what I was wanting to cover in the stream, because I think a lot of people would come to try and contribute to Pest. They would see this or see these errors in continuous integration, and they would panic and not know what to do if they've not used static analysis. But it's super easy. So here, I think we've just got some leftovers with that is valid method. So on iteration line 38, here we go, look. So am I actually using this anymore? Find usages? No, I'm not. So I can just completely remove that. We don't need it. Let's run test again. Now in state, cannot access property iteration on possible null. Let's take a look in state then. Line 208. Yeah, return test get iteration. Iteration is equal to the current iteration, but it is possible that the iteration is null, right? So we basically, I wondered if we can just do like whether we do a null check or like a nullable value here, or whether we do another early return.
I would add another early return.
Yeah.
As we already have them, it would be a bit of strange to make the last return check a lot more complex.
So if there is no iteration for the test, then at this point, we're going to say that the that it is the same, right? It's the let me think about this. No, if there is no iteration for the test, then the comparison isn't. So that's a false, right? There was no iteration here, but this obviously. Oh, that could be null. Okay, so let's say comparison is equal to null.
Yeah. And I think that PHP Insights will still complain. To stop it from complaining, you should define a temporary variable like iteration, where you could test get iteration. And so, because now the return of get iteration could still change between these two calls in theory. Yeah.
Let's run that, see what we get. Compose a link. You get used to typing these commands. Okay, yeah, so we're actually getting the same error that was being returned to us by PHP still. Strict comparison using triple equals between the iteration and null will always evaluate to false. Is this still... The iteration is equal to null. Return whether the comparison is... look, of course. We already do it up here.
Yeah.
So do we move this here up to the top?
But is this really correct? Yeah.
Because then this... Yeah, you're right.
I don't know how this method is used, but is it automatically correct that if I say comparison is null, but the test get iteration would return an instance of iteration, for example, I would say it's false, or?
The use cases, let's just work this through. The use case is basically if this returns true, it's going to ignore the test because it's a duplicate. So the first thing it does is say, well, is the description not equal to the other description? So is my description not equal to the description I'm checking against? Because if it's not equal, then obviously this isn't the same test. Then it says, well, does the iteration match? Because if the iteration matches, so it's got the same description and the iteration is the same, then we want to say it already exists. So basically, if the iteration here and this iteration are both null, then the test is the same test.
Yeah. So on the top one, you should say, instead of return null, you should say return test get iteration. Or dollar iteration, and move the dollar iteration to the top.
Yeah, although the only way we've got an iteration is if it's an instance of has iterations. So that needs to come first.
Yeah.
Then we can safely call that. If we safely call that, then you can say, yeah, if the comparison is equal to null, return iteration is equal to null. You can get rid of that. And that leaves you with that there. Would you agree with that?
No. Because now iteration could still be null with comparison being an instance of iteration. Because you go into this only if comparison is null.
You say if iteration is equal to null. And if the iteration is equal to null, we've already checked that the comparison is equal to null. So we know the comparison is not null. which means that we can say return false, right? Because they can't be the same test at that point.
I'm not sure if it's easier to read to have these composite conditions like comparison equals to null and iteration equals to null, return true. Comparison equals to null.
Yeah, basically if they're the same, isn't it? If ever they're the same.
Yeah, so now both are null and we return true.
Yeah, because the iteration at that point matches.
Yeah. And now you can write an if comparison equals null or iteration equals null, return false, yeah.
And that leaves us with our final check, which is make sure that they're on the same iteration.
Yeah. And now I'm interested if PHP Insights complains about anything. No, perfect.
Okay. And in here, we probably won't see it. But in here, I have, let me find it actually, because it's interesting to see how this is actually tested. Just got to remember where I actually put the test. That's the fake Laravel. So what's quite cool is it's got a fake Laravel application inside the test suite, which has its own tests. Pretty sure there's a test in here somewhere. Oh, I know what it is. It's the output. It's the in here. Here we go. So here you can see it has iterations. That's going to run basically the Laravel application test, which had that one test case in. And we're going to check that we actually receive the correct output, which is a pass with 1 of 10. It will only ever be 1 of 10, by the way, because, again, PHP unit doesn't have a class per test. It only has a class per test case. And Pest generates a class per test. So I hope that makes sense. So even though the iteration, we asked for it 10 times, in this case, because the test suite is PHP unit, it will only run once. But in reality, you never have repeat in PHP unit. So cool. I am going to push this up. And with our refactored logic, we should be able to jump back into Pest. All right, so let's come back into Pest here. And I'm just going to, occasionally the files don't always follow me, I find. So I'm just going to make sure we've got very much the latest symlink. Okay, so anytime we now deal with an iteration, we know that it could be null, which is fine. So we need to go back to basically.
I think you should add a space after underscore iteration before the equal or two. Yeah.
I think to be fair, I think the CS fixer will sort that out for us, but it's nice to see it while we're going. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm just going to check my notes here, make sure we're going in the right direction. So testable is here. And here's the iteration. So the iteration is there, or it can be null. It gets passed in through the constructor, which is exactly what we would expect. I think now we need to go back to the test case factory. So test case factory. And we already added the has iterations interface. So we've already added that, but we actually now need to be able to understand how to support that repeat function. So finding this test again, this function here needs to be supported. So we can actually add this in here and it will become available in Pest, which is pretty cool. So let's find an example of something that already happens in here that does that. Just trying to think of a good place to put it.
The with method should be pretty similar, I think.
I don't know whether with is in this particular one. I think we need to call. Yeah, I tell you what we need to do. We need to drop in. So here's only look. So it stores certain things about this. So only, if you're wondering, is something you can call to say, I only want this test to be run. So it's another method you can chain. Maybe I know you've used it. Maybe people in the audience have seen it. But in the
pretty
same
cool
way,
feature. Yeah, pretty
Very
cool
cool.
thing I found out about only is that you can have multiple tests being only.
Yeah, super useful when you're trying to debug like a set and you don't want to go and give them all groups because it's like a one-time thing. So hit repeat count and let's set that to 0 to start with, right? Make sure everyone's happy. No more comments. Late today. Hey, Adrian, great to have you with us. So this is going to be an integer or null. And this is going to store how many times we've requested a repeat to happen. So the number of times this test will be repeated. Okay. And we can make it read-only because once it's been set, it shouldn't really be updated ever. And then we need an actual repeat function so that we can set that somewhere. So I'm just going to look for, it's definitely not that far down. I think here maybe underneath construct, let's just have it as one of the first things we can call. So public function repeat.
Is the only method also here, or where's the only method?
The only method is slightly higher up. So where only gets called, I'm actually going to call repeat. So I mean, depending on how only works, we might be able to just set it directly. In which case, let's try it. Let's see how that works then. Let's get rid of repeat for now. See if we can just set the property like immediately, and then we can come back if it seems like it's going to be cleaner to do it the other way. If that makes sense. But we still need to do the actual logic, right? So in here we are. So data sets, this is where data sets are resolved. We actually, at this point, want to check for the repeat. So let's try it. So for each range of 1, fill that out with 1 to the requested repeat count. Only if we've requested a repeat count, but we'll come back to that in just a moment. As iteration. And then we need like an array to store this in, like a temporary array up here, right? Runners. And then we can say runners equals array merge. And we want to basically, we're working in PHP 7.3 here, by the way. That's the minimum for Pest, which takes away some of the really nice things that we might be able to otherwise use. And then we need like a method. So we need to be able to do something like create test case.
But don't you have this $create test?
Yes, although do we have to we're going to have to edit the $create test, aren't we? Because you're going to have to also accept an iteration.
Yeah.
A nullable iteration.
I don't think that you have to add default value, because you will always put in one.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you could add type hints for the arguments.
Is that supported in 7.3?
Yeah. Property type hints was added in 7.4, so far I know. Our argument type hints are in PHP since 7.0, I think.
That's going to be an array, isn't it?
It's the data set.
And the iteration will be a nullable, a null or an integer. Okay. We can use the question mark in for iteration. Yeah. So we create the new class name. Now this new class name is the thing we were talking about earlier in testable, I think it was. So in testable, take a look. Here we are. Test, description, data, and the iteration. So we need to build up at this point an iteration object, but we need to build it up like one for each iteration. So we need to pass more than just the iteration in, don't we? We need to pass in, well, we could pass in an iteration object like that, right?
I would build the iteration object inside of this function.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes things easier.
I'm going to say iteration total, and or I like it. I prefer it the other way around, I think. So.
Oh wait, does it make it easier? We already need this if repeat count equals null on the outside, so where we have the for loop.
Yeah, so I think to be honest, it'd be nicer like
yeah,
I think it would be nicer like that, and that can just be passed straight in, and all this method is interested in is literally building up that test case and passing it through correctly.
Yeah.
So this here, we can copy this. And
you should copy it in the array map, not the create test case.
Yes, you are correct. Because create test is our callable. And then we need to build up the iteration. So the iteration is going to go here. So the reason we're doing this is once we've got runners at the end, so once we've actually built our runners, we can return those runners. And those runners are going to be basically an extended version of this. This will return runners. Now, I'm just wondering, if the repeat count is null, we don't want to loop over for each. But would it make more sense? Would it make more sense to simplify this so that it always loops over a for each, but intelligently decides whether to construct an iteration or not based on a repeat count of 1? Or a null repeat count even?
Yeah, you could always walk over the repeat count and default it to 1. In that case, you would need to check inside there, yeah.
So you would say iteration equals this repeat count is equal to null. Well, if it's equal to null, then we're going to return null. Otherwise, we want a new iteration.
Yeah.
And the iteration is the iteration, and the repeat count is the repeat count. And then we pass that there, right?
Yeah, but I think that you need an array fill for this third argument. Because what array map does is, I don't know if array map can handle arrays of different sizes.
How we could find out is we could go to the test that we wrote earlier, see what happens. Argument 4 must be of type array null given.
Yeah.
So we're saying it would have to be
no. This is all fine. First thing I would do is break the arguments of error map into single lines. Okay. And now, instead of directly passing $iteration, we use array fill as a third argument. No, third argument. Sorry, fourth. In total, it is fourth. And it will be count. Oh no, start index will be 0. Or no, it's 1. Yeah, and count will be count of data sets. And yeah.
Okay.
Looks good. It does something.
It does something, but well, actually, let's not do it that way. Let's do it this way. Yeah, so we haven't added that yet, which is fine. So let's do that next. So in our, let me just check notes and any comments. Hello, everybody who's joined us. So you can see here, it already points us to the correct place, test call. So if you look in here, I think you would see, yeah, here we go, look, calls to only. And I think we can just drop in repeat underneath, right? So repeat in times and return itself. And I would like to actually write self, but everything else is use test call, so I'm going to do that. And we'll say this, test case factory, repeat count equals times. Return this from the test again. Oh! Would you look at that? Awesome. That looks like a test that was repeated 10 times.
It does.
Well, actually, is that 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 times. Interesting. That might be because of the range.
I don't think so, because we have range 1.
Yeah, so index 1. That's interesting. Have I been stupid? Is there? No. Okay, let's have a look. Okay. Let's stop and think. So I'm actually going to run this from here. What I will do is I will come into, here we go, is literally talking about something we mentioned earlier. Come into the, I'm in collision, PHP unit. Let's tag on only onto this test, and let's run it using console. Okay. Ha. Still wouldn't expect. Actually, I might expect that. That's possible. Okay, yeah, that is possible. Let's actually add an assertion to our. I'm just going to get rid of collision. Let's actually add an assertion to this, right? So I'm just going to do something silly like expect true to be true.
But should you be able to do sys get iteration?
Should I be able to? Yes, I should be able to do this get iteration.
And then you could do expect iteration count. Iteration was it? Yeah. To be
the iteration count.
Exactly.
That certain that 10 is identical to 1. So 9 is identical to 1. 8 is identical to 1.
But this means that iteration is... In which order does the error message?
That's a good question. Let's dump and die this. I can't dump and die. Let's dump this.
Because I think the order of the error message is it fails to assert that the actual value matches the expected one. So it would mean that
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the iteration is increasing. I don't think iteration count is increasing. I think this is why I ended up using a global or went for a global.
Okay.
Because I think once it's inside the function, it doesn't like to go back outside of the scope again, even when you pass by the opposite of reference, which won't come to my head right now. So globals, iteration count, ++. Expect that to be globals, iteration count. Define variable iteration count. What am I calling that?
After all, yeah.
Ah! Would you look at that?
Perfect.
Would you look at that? Let me get rid of the only and run the whole suite. I want to see if we've broken standard tests. No, we haven't. So standard tests all work, and then you just get this great iteration functionality as well.
Yeah. So second test, repeat with the data set.
Yeah, indeed. And I think it might just work, you know. Find out. So actually, let's do an even simpler one first. It works with higher order tests, right?
But one thing now we get into problems with the global is it doesn't reset between the two tests.
Indeed. I'm wondering whether we have a total of all of, well, actually, we can't do that even, because if you ran one of these in isolation, the global iteration count would fail.
Yeah.
The only thing we're able to do, I think, is set a global per test and then check them all at the end.
One thing I would like to do is add some more tests to the first one. So we say get iteration is the same like or global iteration count. But I would also like to add to be greater than 0 and to be less than 10.
Yeah.
You could chain it, or?
Yeah, you can chain it. I wonder who wrote that. To be greater than 0, to be less than 10.
I think it's less than or equal.
Oh,
connection lost.
I might just need to get a charge. Oh, no, we're back. Are we? No. Well, let me just get a charger for my keyboard. Thankfully, I don't have a magic mouse where, there we go. Where
one thing I can, where we have the charger port open while you use it. Yeah, so
down.
an old one. Yeah. I can highly recommend the Logitech Master Series. It's just amazing. And all charging ports are available while using, so.
No, you can see that. I might actually turn a light on in here. It's getting quite dark, isn't it? But
yeah.
I'm using the MX Master 2. This is. I've had it quite a while now.
I think we should use it to be less than or equal, because to be less than 11 is technically correct, but reads wrong. Oh, yeah. To be clear that it's 1 based, yeah.
So if this was going to work with higher order tests, I would need a new global. I think we'll refactor this, but let's just say first test iteration count and second test iteration count.
Yeah.
And then here we're going to say first test iteration count 10, second test iteration count should be 10. I'm going to repeat this one 10 times, and we'll say expect. Can't do shorthand because we're in 7.3. Man. And I probably want to return this. What do we call it? Get iteration. Iteration. And then I could probably do that, but I just need to do this tap. I need to do a tap as well, don't I? So tap function. Second test. This one needs to be first test. Okay. Undefined array key iteration.
So count. After all.
Fine. After where, sorry?
Yeah.
Okay.
Seems like I didn't work with.
Yeah. Is tap not being fired? Or is tap being fired at the wrong time? Tap maybe being fired too late, possibly. Although.
Yeah, but tap should be fired before. Oh, shouldn't you use to be also as a function, or you can't use a function in the to be, or?
Yes, I don't know. You can't use a function in to be.
I think you should stick with a to be greater than 1 and less than 10. Everything more would be too complex, yeah.
Even that is, if I was saying that 0 is identical to 10. This is interesting. Okay. It must be something to do with our global, right? Because it's definitely running 10 times.
Yeah.
You know, it's running the correct amount of times. Let's run it here as well. So it's being executed. Oh, look at that. 1 extra. Is it 1 extra on this one as well? I've got an iteration count in there. Yeah, 2 10 out of 10s, look. So something's not quite right. How was that passing before, but is now failing?
Could it be because of the expect and the after all? Just an idea I have.
But why is it being reset to 0 again in after all? Get rid of that one. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, this expect.
Yeah.
But that is interesting because that is still being like classed as that's still being classed as part of the repeat in after all. We tried by reference, Adrian. It wouldn't work. It didn't do anything. So that's like a little something to we still need to come back and figure out, because that is going to cause problems, isn't it? Yeah.
But is it officially supported to do expect and after all?
No, it's not in the docs, but it is used elsewhere in the Pest test suite.
Okay.
So it's not something that you would really see out in the wild, I don't think. I'll say that 0 is identical to 10. So I think it's just this, isn't it? This isn't working still. If I dump global's second test iteration count, there's a test unit. Oh, no. Ignore me. It is working. But then why is it 0?
Could you dump $globals and so after all?
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of globals. So that was first, second. Okay, second is 10, but first is
0.
You have only on the second one, but no only on the first one, or?
That's true. So is that? Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Lol. Nice.
Okay, but this is also a bit tricky because, like you now, if you add only to one of these two tests, the other one will fail.
Yeah. Yeah. So ideally, this needs to change. I mean, I guess the other thing we could do is we could put these into. Can I get this? Get description. Like, I'm just wondering if I could fill an array, because the test description is unique. It's actually not unique because we're working with repeat. So I take that back. Okay. So we could do with finding a better way to actually test that these work.
But what you could do is you can do what you had in mind with the description and so on. Go to the top to your globals, and there you define globals, repeat or iteration count, for example, as an array.
Yeah.
And no, keep them all empty. And now in your tests, you say globals, iteration counters, and as second key, this description or get name, or however it's named. I think get name is wrong because of.
Yeah, I don't think it's get name, is it? Is the one just called name? No. I know that maybe _ description might work. Let me just dump and die and find out. There we go.
Yeah.
So _ description.
Okay, and there you do ++.
Yeah, I mean, only
in your after all, you say for each iteration counters, expect $value to be equal to 10.
Yeah.
So every test that has been run in this file, it assumes that every of these has a repeat of 10. So if you would add a repeat of 20 to one, it will fail.
Yeah. So we're going to do the same with this one here. Yeah. And then we can say...
Couldn't you even use the expect each?
Yeah.
To fully abstract it to be 10.
And then the only requirement is that if you've got a test that you write in here, you have to repeat it 10 times.
Yeah.
Defined array key.
Yeah, okay. So you can't do plus plus if the key is undefined.
I think I'm going to use isSet for now, but I think that PHP Stan is going to complain at me. But we'll sort that out in a bit. I just have to use a different one. Yeah, we'll sort that out. If not isSet, then we want to set it
to 0. Yeah.
And we can copy this here.
Couldn't you use this even in the before each?
I was just thinking about that. Quite possibly. Let's try it. Let's try it in before each. I was just wondering whether because it's exactly the same for every test, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just whether I think we have access to all of this in before each. Get rid of that.
This is some really fancy magic shit now.
Yeah. That's fine. I've just left a reference in.
Yeah.
Oh.
Just copies the string you have in it.
Oh, we're inside thingy, aren't we? We're inside.
Oh yeah. True.
We are inside thingy, so we can say this.
Yeah.
But we're in higher order for a second. We are in higher order here, but we don't have.
We have removed it. Yeah.
Okay. Works with one, works with the other, works with all of them. Whew!
Perfect.
I hope everyone is still with us, and appreciate you hanging around through our debugging session. I've got the Mac on the side with running the Restream, the MacBook on the side, and it's got 8% power left, so I'm just going to have to monitor that. In fairness, I don't want to go all that much further because we're coming up to an hour and a half. But I think we've got all the basics in for repeating, right? What was the other one we were going to test for?
Was the data set.
Data set, yeah, let's do that. That'd be cool if this just works. It works with data sets. Let's do a proper function this time. And let's have something like with foo bar as. So actually no, let's just do 2.
Yeah, and repeat 5 now.
Yeah, repeat 5. If this works correctly, this should just work.
Yeah.
Although the description, it actually changes per
no,
data
the description doesn't change. The name changes, I think.
Let's check that. Yeah, look.
Okay.
So the description changes on a per data set basis. which means that these will actually be classed as two separate tests by our global iteration counters.
Yeah.
Meaning that we can repeat 10 times. We can grab this expectation. And each one should basically be exactly the same, right? As what we've just said. But it passes 20 times.
But one thing I wonder now is we should add some kind of test that it runs 20 times in total.
Does it actually run 20 times? Yeah. I guess what we could do,
just pass the description string you use works with data sets to another global. No, I think this is okay.
Okay, if you want to check that it does that, and we can then have a secondary global, which is like globals data set or iteration with dataset counter.
I think dataset iteration counter is shorter and easier to read. Yeah.
It says a lot when a native English person can't pick names as well as a foreign speaker, doesn't it? Just give me 2 seconds because this MacBook's about to die. So carry on looking at this code while I just go grab a charger.
What do you mean, Adrian, with complicated?
Okay. Okay, I'm back. Hope you can hear me okay still. I hope I've not randomly turned into Terminator while grabbing my charger.
Wasn't there a before method on a test base? So could you do it before?
I didn't think so. You don't have before. You've got a global before each, and you've got before all.
Yeah. Okay.
So here, what we're going to say is global, sorry, dataset iteration counter plus plus. And if this is run correctly in after all, if it's not 0, then we can assume it will be 20. You can say expect globals dataset iteration counter to be in 0 or 20. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is you could make this null to be a bit more specific and then set it to 0 here. And you can say, if it's not null, it should be 20.
Yeah. I think that is fine for the moment.
Mm-hmm. So we've tested that it works with data sets, which it does. It works with higher order tests, which it does. It can be repeated in a general way, which it can. And if we come in and compose a test unit, we see that everything runs, and just up here, we have our nice repeats. Now I'm using Warp, which is pretty new and out there. And I don't think Warp is rendering emoticons or icons correctly. So we can't see the little repeat symbol here. One thing that I kind of want in place, because that's using the collision printer, Whereas if I was to run this in PHP Storm, which is using the PHP Storm printer, you can see that we don't get the repeat information. Somewhere I know I can set this to show me like past tests as well. There we go. So it would be cool if we could also output that information in the PHP Storm tab. And I think that's possible. So I've done quite a bit of work on the PHP Storm thing because I built the printer for it. So here we are with Team City. Team City is obviously the company behind PHP Storm, hence the name Team City. And I'm pretty sure, yeah, we get a test result.
Just for clarity, the company behind PHP Storm's JetBrains, Team City, is just a CI tool created by JetBrains.
Sorry, thanks for the clarification. Yeah. In here somewhere, I think we have a is pest test. Is pest test suite. I'm not really interested in whether it's a pest test suite. Is pest test. Here we go. Yes. So we check whether it's usable or whether testable, sorry, is in the test. And if testable is in the test, we could also then check whether that test has iterations. And that would allow us basically to output more or less anything we wanted. So we want end test. So here we go. End test. It prints the event name. So we want to do it prior to printing the event name. So if this is pest test, did I do it as static? Is pest test. Say test name equals. We need to do this in two places. Yeah, we need to do it in two. I'm thinking in my head, but we need to do this in two places because the way this works out, the start and finish is based on this flag here. So we just need to put the same. Well, we'll just copy the logic in two places now, and then we need to abstract it to a better function. But if it is a pest test and test has iterations,
couldn't you just add it? Oh no, it's test get name, not. So a method like get name on sys.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what we need to refactor to that. Or I guess I could just say, and test is an instance of has iterations. Then that being the case, we can say test get iteration. And we can say, let's say iteration equals test get iteration. And we can say test name dot equals, or you could even do an early return here, if is equal to null. And we'll come back and refactor this before the PR goes to published. But we can say
you have removed the null check.
It's equal to null and just return. We're not interested in actually changing the test name. But otherwise, we want to say, and let's copy the same syntax, right? So dot equals sprintf. Format is $s, %s, sorry, %s. And then we need to pass in iteration, total iterations. And we also need a space just before that. And then this here becomes test name. Now let's do exactly what you said just a moment ago and create a static function get test name, passing in test, returning a string. And this is just going to return test name early now. And this could even just return. Nah, never mind. Let's just do that for now. So get test name. This can now become get test name, passing in the test. And then in start test, we need to do the same thing.
A moment ago, you used self get test name, not static.
Okay. Not quite. Undefined property, total iterations. I think that's because I never called it total iterations. Why have I done that?
It's just total in the get name.
It doesn't look like it's been indexed by PHP Storm. Ah!
Yeah.
Nice.
And one thing, instead of %s, you should use %d, because those are full numbers. Yeah.
Very nice. So now you get this like actual output, super nice output in PHP Storm itself, which is really cool. The other thing I'd want to do, but I'm not going to do it on stream today, is just update this here as well, so you get the same kind of syntax and output. And then I just need to check errors as well. Like what happens if one of these fails, which is going to be fun to test. I think we need a random integer generator, so we can just test that manually.
One thing I really wonder is PHP Storm provides retesting only the failed tests.
What would happen if one of these fails?
If the 5th iteration of the 10th fails.
But saying that, I reckon what it's going to do is repeat. It's going to ask to repeat just this one, and then it will, and then Pest will run the repeats again. I'm not saying that. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm just guessing. And if that was the case, that would be what you'd want, because you're dealing with a test that you've asked to repeat because it is by nature faulty.
Yeah.
Well, we have sort of achieved what we set out to achieve. I'm going to run compose a test, and we're going to see a bunch of problems. There we go. So again, it's exactly the same as in collision. We can run compose a lint. That's going to automatically fix all of our styling issues so that everything matches the test style. We then run compose a test again, and my bet is that we're going to receive only one. That's very impressive. So Clojure has parameter iteration with a nullable type declaration. Let's take a look, see if we can fix that quickly. Best case factory, line 167. I think I know what this is already, which if it is that, it's going to be a bit of a bag. Yeah, so this is super strict. We're on max. And so when I say we're on max, what I mean is in PHP stand.neon. Not only are we on max level, but we also include extra strict rules. So there is a lot of strict ruling going on, and basically the strict ruling is saying, look, you can't have a nullable argument passed to the function. That's literally what that's saying.
Never?
Like, it will always fail. Like, one thing we can do is stop doing that. PHP stan ignore next line. There we go, and then it passes. Now, whether or not this will be accepted is a question. Like Nuno or Owen or whoever's going to review this might look and think, well, it's worth it for that one instance. But if not, I think this is originally why I'd got the inside the iteration object, why I'd got it able to have the isValid function. So that you could always pass an object of iteration around, even if it wasn't actually going to iterate over anything. But
adjusting the code, but adjusting the code only to fulfill some super strict test tool rules seems totally wrong to me.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with this particular ruling. I do definitely agree with a lot that the static analysis throws my way. But in this case, I don't see why we shouldn't be able to pass null or an object, especially seen as PHP stand will tell us if we've not handled null anyway.
Yeah.
So it's not like we cause danger. So I'm going to actually include this PHP stand ignore next line, and we'll see what the guys have to say on that once it goes in for proper PR. We haven't finished this PR yet, but I think we are at a point. It's going to fail here. So this is failing because we do basically an entire check of the output of the test suite, and we check it against a snapshot. So I can say composer update snapshots. Composer update snapshots, and then I can run composer test again, and now the test suite should pass. There we go. So we have a fully passing test suite with repeat support. There are obviously a few other things we want to change. I want to clean up the output and how it looks, make sure it works with some edge cases like errors being thrown. But I think for the most part, we have integrated repeat support into Pest. I'm going to put the PR up, but in draft form. So if any of you have any ideas or want to go and have a look around the source code or change anything, feel free to go and offer your contributions to it. But yeah, I want to say thank you for joining us and hanging out, and thanks Tom for rushing back from work and managing to be with us. I think that's been pretty productive.
Yeah. Having the repeat logic working with all the other ones is definitely a solid result of a 2-hour stream.
Indeed. And I hope that it's kind of opened up Pest a little bit as to where you would need to go if any of you watching do want to contribute to Pest. It is a bit of a dark horse at first, but if you kind of learn a few basic building blocks of how Pest puts tests together, then it clears up quite quickly. Cool. Well, I'm going to end it there. I think I've got to go and fit some flooring for my sister now. So that's a great end to my evening. But thanks everybody for joining, and thanks again, Tom. Hopefully next week, I'd need to double check, but hopefully next week we'll have the next episode of Pest in Practice. We should be getting back to good old opendoor.me, carrying on with our tests for that. So I look forward to jumping back into opendoor.me and continuing to write Pest tests, perhaps even using the new feature that we've just created. Who knows?
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks, everybody.